If you have just come on, we're just doing a little pre-assessment. I'm going to give everybody one more minute to go through the questions. Don't worry if you didn't get to all of them, it's fine, but another minute. Somebody just asked, they've missed the first two sessions of the series. Yes, they are recorded, and I also send the PowerPoint, so um, I will send you the recordings. And we're going to wrap up the poll now. So I'm going to hit end. It's totally okay if you did not finish, but thank you so much for participating in our little quiz. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so first we're going to talk about what is related services, or what are related services. Well, related services basically are recommended when appropriate to improve each student's ability to achieve their educational goals. So it has to be relevant to their education. So if it's something that they need help with at home but not in school, then related services are not going to be recommended. It has to be educationally relevant. When a student is determined eligible for special education, they are eligible for related services. So when you have your IEP meeting, they can be determined eligible for and or, meaning one or both of program services, which we talked about at the last session, and or related services. However, if you are determined eligible for related services, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get a program service. So it only works one way. So you have to be determined for services first before anything else. They must both be, like I said, educationally relevant and necessary. So when a service can be linked to an IEP, either the present levels of performance, which we'll talk about a little bit later, or the goals and objectives, then it's educationally relevant. Who is eligible for related services? Well, last time we talked about IDEA, and according to this law, a student must need special education services to be considered eligible for related services, like I just talked about. A child must have a full and individual evaluation to determine eligibility. So we have two things, one called an initial evaluation and then another one called a reevaluation. So the initial is when you are evaluated for services the first time. So usually that's a whole battery of tests and evaluations. And then after that, you would get your IEP, which either has just program services, just related services, or a combination of both. And if you feel a need to change or add anything, that would be a reevaluation, and that would be an assessment separate from that. So now let's talk about what are related services and what are not related services. So related services help in specific areas such as speech or motor skills, often called related services or direct services. Services provide the extra help students need to benefit from general or special education. So like I said before, you can have just related services, which means you're in the general education classroom, but you get that extra support from a specific therapist, such as speech, occupational, physical therapy, things like that. And either they push into the classroom or they would pull you out. Now, when we talk about related services, related means connected. These services are often in connection to your child's education and development. Um, they need to be beneficial from your child needs to benefit from these extra services. Related services, there's a whole bunch of them. So that could be transportation, that could be speech and language, audiology or hearing services, interpreting services, psychological services, physical therapy, occupational therapy, recreational therapy, counseling, orientation and mobility services, medical services, such as nursing services, social work, and then there is also parent counseling and training. We're not going to talk about all of these today. We're only going to be talking about a few. What are not related services? Well, they're not related services when they're more technical and focused on the classroom itself. So, such as like tools you might use, such as a computer, or particular modifications, meaning changes to the curriculum, those are not related services. We often refer to these as supplementary services, supplementary meaning added. So these happen in the regular classroom and are not part of related services. Let's talk about related services in the IEP. So the IEP will indicate the frequency and duration, meaning the number of sessions per week the services will be provided, and the length of each section. So you might see this as 2 times per week for 30 minutes. The type of related service, such as physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy. The location, so this could be inside the classroom or a separate location or a combination of the two. This will also, the IEP will indicate the group size. So will your child be seen individually or in a group? And if in a group, then how many in that group? So when we talk about that, I just mentioned push in and pull out services. So integrating services into the classroom actually can benefit all students, not just your child. When related services are provided in the classroom, everybody benefits. For example, classroom activities are not missed. More opportunities for skill practice in the natural environment. So if they're working on speech and they're working on social language, meaning their interaction with their peers during like playtime or something, if they're younger, then that could actually be happening inside the classroom, and then everybody would benefit. The therapist can monitor the effectiveness of strategies. It also fosters social acceptance, self-esteem, and social skills, because we do know that some students feel bad when they get pulled out of the classroom. So if it's a push-in, they don't feel as singled out. Teachers can apply strategies after seeing them implemented by the therapist. So if the therapist goes into the classroom, then the teacher can watch what they're doing and then implement that in the classroom. So it's actually a seamless way for them to transfer the skills. Benefits for the entire class: increased achievement for both children with and without disabilities, increased attention, increased on-task behavior, meaning most of the time, if there's another adult in the room, students will generally participate more and be more engaged in the lesson, increased performance in the classroom, and increased performance on standardized tests. So now what I'm going to talk about is what I just mentioned before, individual versus group services, which is indicated on the IEP. So individual therapy. Some of the benefits are confidentiality. They're working one-to-one with the child, so everything just stays between the child, you, and the therapist. They also get one-on-one attention, meaning all of their attention is just on that one child. It's usually an intense and comprehensive level of analysis and treatment. Again, if you're working one-to-one with somebody, then you can really look at what they're doing and how well they're doing it or not doing it well. Completely customized to the individual. So they're only working with that one student. So that means everything that they're teaching that student is just for that student. It create something called a strong therapeutic alliance. I'm sorry, I can't talk today. Therapeutic alliance. A therapeutic alliance is that relationship between the provider of the service and the student. So we know just as human beings, when you get to know somebody one on one, you get to know them more than when you get to interact with them in a group. They also, individual therapy promotes development of self awareness. Now let's talk about group therapy. So, group therapy, one of the benefits is that students know that they are not alone. They are not the only ones that are having these difficulties. Another great thing about group therapy is it's an opportunity to both receive and give support. So when they're in a group, if they're doing great in a group, you know, a lot of times therapists give high fives, a round of applause, things like that, so they'll feel like a part of a group, and they can also give the support, which is beneficial to their social emotional development. They can let their peers know how well they're doing. Um, this is a broader alliance. That alliance that I talked about in the individual, where I said a strong therapeutic alliance, that's stronger. This is broader because now they'll have an alliance not only with the therapist, but the other students in their group as well. They'll also develop communication and social skills because there are other students in the group that they have to participate with. And this also helps them develop self awareness. Also, and this I think is probably one of the best things about group therapy is that they'll see models of successful behaviors in other individuals. So now we're going to watch a video, and it's going to talk a little bit about what are related services.
This.
Hold on. Make sure there's sound. Come on. Share sound. Okay, good. It's on there. All right, let's make sure that it all works. Why is there no sound now? What happened to the sound?
Storyteller tactics.
Let me know if you can't hear the sound. All right. So, that's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, a brief overview of the services. So now let's get back to the PowerPoint. Here we go. All right. So the related services we're going to be talking about today are occupational therapy, otherwise known as OT, physical therapy known as PT, speech and language therapy, you might see the acronym being SP or ST, and then counseling. So those are the four we're going to concentrate on today. So occupational therapy services can help a student in the classroom and educational environment. Because remember, like I said in the beginning, when we go back to things, we have to go back to, is it educationally relevant? Does it connect to their education? These services are provided by qualified occupational therapists. Occupational therapy services in school may include such services as self-help skills or adaptive living, meaning helping students with things like eating or dressing. Functional mobility, which is basically moving safely through the school. Positioning, meaning sitting appropriately in class. Sensory motor processing, for example, using the senses and the muscles. Fine motor, such as writing and cutting. And gross motor performance, meaning walking and athletic skills. And life skills training, vocational skills, as well as social skills training. So in order to receive occupational therapy, the child might have challenges with what we call neuromuscular function. So basically this has to do with the nervous system, the muscular system, and skeletal system, and how those three work together. Are they working together smoothly? Is the brain kind of coordinating them with the central nervous system? Are you able to move confidently throughout the school? Somebody who needs OT services might have challenges also with motor function, including fine motor, oral motor, and visual motor integration. Fine motor meaning using your hands. That has to do with, like we said before, feeding yourself, dressing yourself. Oral motor could have to do with feeding. The muscles in their mouth maybe have some difficulty chewing, things like that, or they have an open mouth. They continuously have their mouth open, maybe with their tongue kind of protruding a little bit. Or visual motor integration, meaning completing things like puzzles, things like that, where their brain has to coordinate with their body. They also might have challenges with sensory and perceptual functioning. So sensory meaning your five senses and how the brain kind of deals with noise, light, sound, like I said before, things like that, touch. And then perceptual function, which is the ability to process the information that's coming in from your five senses and then making sense of that. So kind of making sense of their environment. They also might have trouble with cognitive, meaning understanding, and psychosocial function. Psychosocial is basically their ability to deal with day-to-day environments and the social tasks, like the things they have to do socially. And somebody who requires OT services might have a challenge in daily living skills and school participation in various settings, including the classroom, the bathroom, the cafeteria, the playground, things like that. Now we're going to talk about physical therapy services. Physical therapy helps a student to improve their physical ability to function and make smooth transitions at school. So let's talk about that. So PT, like I said before, that's physical therapy for short, focuses on gross motor development. Motor development is can include things such as running, skipping, jumping. It may also focus on mobility, which is how they move, and balance, and also coordination. And again, this has to connect to school in the various school settings, such as classroom, the gym, bathrooms, playgrounds, and the staircase. PT may be recommended to support a student in accessing various areas of the school via walking, wheelchair, or other means of mobility. It may be recommended to support a student's participation in classroom activities. In other words, how they maneuver and get around the classroom. It could also be recommended to support a student in, like I said before, accessing the lunchroom, playground, bathroom, even transportation, getting on and off the bus, things like that. So now let's talk about speech language pathology services. They're provided by a speech language professional, and it can include identification of children with speech or language impairments, which we're going to get a little bit into, and the diagnosis. They help diagnose, and then they determine the degree of the specific speech or language impairment. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. So therapists focus on communication skills such as comprehension, meaning following directions, understanding texts with other reading. They also focus on language, meaning the word meaning, how they understand words, how they put words together, how they use correct grammar in speaking. Articulation, meaning speech sounds, how they come out. Voice, so use of voice to produce sounds, meaning they might talk really low, really loud, and not be able to determine that volume. They also teach communication skills such as pragmatics, and that's like the social language, knowing social cues, when to say thank you, when to say hello. Also the fluency or the rhythm of speech. So if they talk in a rhythm that is very fast, very slow, or a combination of both, where usually it's hard to understand what they're even what their point is, what they're trying to get across. So students who require speech language therapy services, these are some of the disorders that they deal with. Articulation disorder, which reduces intelligibility, one thing that I'm having trouble with today, which is how they sound. They might also help with if they have a abnormal voice, like I talked about before, that pitch or loudness or softness of their voice. The fluency disorder, which is what I talked about before, which is how fast or slow, the rhythm of their speech. They might have a disorder with expressive language, which is their speaking, or receptive language, which is their understanding. If you were at my last presentation, I actually talked about my daughter who had speech services, and her diagnosis was a speech and language disorder, otherwise unspecified, um, which I don't know what that really meant at the time, but it basically was that she had some kind of language disorder, but they couldn't figure it out. They can also help students with hearing loss. Sometimes that affects their speech. So now let's talk about bilingual speech language services. So bilingual speech therapy means speech therapy provided in both the child's strongest language, usually the first or dominant language, as well as the second language. This is best practice. So this is usually determined by the home language survey, and through their initial evaluation, the speech therapist will usually figure out which is their dominant language. They address the same communication disorders and difficulties, but what they do on top of that is they have a cultural knowledge that kind of helps them understand the different nuances or the different things that influence cultures and how they speak. Bilingual speech therapists can address specific speech pattern problems related to both languages. So that pattern or that rhythm, they can, if it's seen in both or in one and not the other, they can help with that. They can determine patterns of normal speaking. They can help children recognize what we call phonetic similarities and differences in their language that can help them improve. So phonetic meaning how sounds are pronounced. So we know that, for example, in English, we have Y that says yeah. In Spanish, I believe that doesn't exist. Usually that's the double L. So there's these different nuances that bilingual speech therapists are more able to support than a regular English speech language therapist. And they can also, just like any other speech therapist, help your children, our students, reach their language progress, within their age group. So, like I said before, so they don't feel so singled out. Now we're going to be talking about counseling services. So counseling services help students recognize and modify or change behaviors that interfere with their learning. So again, this all goes back to learning. Counseling is recommended for students who have social emotional difficulties that greatly interfere or, it makes it hard for them to learn, including trouble interacting appropriately with adults or peers. They might be withdrawn and kind of not really interacting with peers. They can act out with different behaviors. They can have low self-esteem or poor coping skills. But I'm going to bring it back to the fact that this all, in order to get counseling services, has to affect their education. So now let's go back to the IEP for a little bit. You'll notice on the IEP that there's always a reporting progress to parents. So the IEP will indicate when progress will be measured and how you'll be informed of that progress. Most of the time, and it is usually best practice to give you an update when report cards go out. Then before I talked about present levels of performance, that's that first part of the section where it talks about academic, social, and physical abilities. So this part will always talk about the strengths, areas of need, abilities, weakness, related to the disability that they have. This includes evaluation results, academic achievement, meaning, like grades and tests and things like that, social development, how they interact with peers and adults, physical development, and management needs. Management needs meaning how any supports that they need to help with their behavior. It also includes information about how your child's disability affects their progress in the general education curriculum. So if they receive speech services inside the IEP, you would find information about how their speech and language challenges directly affect them in the classroom. In this information, just like I talked about in the last presentation for program recommendations, this comes directly from assessments and observations made by school staff, meaning like teachers, providers, things like that, and by you. Because we talked about last time how important you were to the whole process of developing the individual education plan. Now we talked about the present levels of performance. Now we're going to talk about the measurable annual goals and what they should look like for different services. So goals are developed in order to meet the needs of that the IEP team identifies and the present levels of performance. So if the team and or yourself state that your child is having difficulty interacting with peers, then there should be a goal directly reflecting that. These goals should be reasonable to accomplish within a year. These goals must be measurable, meaning it must be possible to determine whether your child achieved these goals. If your child is participating in alternate assessment, the goals are usually broken down into short-term objectives or benchmarks as well. And this is the same for program services as well, but I'm just going through it a little bit with related services. Now let's talk about arranging related services. So I'm going to be bringing this into preschool and to school age. So in preschool, if your child is 3 or 4 years old and recommended for related services, he or she can receive services at a New York City public school, 3K or pre-K program. Usually who helps you do that is the CPSC administrator. This could be at a preschool program, Head Start, hospital, safe facility, or childcare location arranged by you. Also, if it's appropriate, they could be provided at home. And like I said before, the CPSC will arrange for providers to serve your child according to the start date on the IEP. So they basically find you the providers. That's different because in school age, we're going to talk about that right now. So for school age, if your child is in kindergarten through grade 12, he or she should be receiving services at school. So the first thing is the New York City public school supervisors of speech, physical therapy, occupational therapy, counseling, etc., will assign a provider to go to the school. If they are unable to provide they're unable to secure a provider at school, you'll receive something called a related service authorization form. I know we've been sending out a lot lately, and in addition to this form, you'll also receive a list of New York City public school approved providers. And what this is In the meantime, as we're trying to hire more people or find an agency that can go into the school to provide services for your child, this is in the interim. This is in the meantime so that your child doesn't lose out on services. Once you find a provider, and like I said, this is a little bit different in CPSE, the CPSE will find a provider for you. In school age, if we have to get to the related services authorization form part, then you actually have to find the provider. This is not to say that you cannot get help somewhere. So once you get the related services authorization and you're trying to find a provider, the first thing you should do is reach out to your school for help, specifically either your parent coordinator or if you have like a school psychologist. So those are people that can also help you. Then, if they're unable to help you, then either you or the school can reach out to me and my team to help you find a provider. Once you find a provider, both you and the provider will complete the related service authorization form and send it back to the school, who will forward it to my team. Okay, we've made it to the end, guys. So things that I think we could take away from today's session is my team deals with speech, occupational therapy, OT, physical therapy, PT, and counseling needs. However, we will help you with anything in regards to special education. There are benefits and challenges to both push in and pull out services, as well as individual and group services, and that's something that you have to determine with the special education team at school. Bilingual speech services help develop both the first and second language. And the first place you need to reach out for help regarding related services is your child's school. So before we go to Q&A, we're going to take another little poll. It's the same questions, but I want to see if I was able to help you understand anything better. Ooh, there we go. So we're going to go back to the poll. Where am I? And let's launch the post assessment. So interpreters, if you can basically do what you did before. I'm going to give you another couple of minutes to complete the post assessment. And if you've noticed in the chat, I actually dropped a feedback form. I have the feedback form available in English, Spanish, and Arabic. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting for the Mandarin form, so I do apologize for that. But if you can fill out the feedback form, that would be great as well. So give you another couple minutes to do the post assessment. Gonna give you another 2 minutes for that post assessment, and then we'll open it up for questions. All right, so I'm gonna be ending the poll right now. So thank you so much for participating in the poll. I would like to open up the floor now to questions. You can either drop them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Oh, look, we already have somebody waiting in the wings. Okay, are SEATs and paras considered related services? For that one first. So paraprofessionals are technically considered related services. They're just not handled by my team. But of course, if you ever need any help, you can reach out. And then that's for school age. If it's for preschool, then you reach out to the CPSE administrator. And for the SEAT or the SETS teacher, again, those aren't considered related services. Those are actually called considered program recommendations. For SEATs, you would reach out to the CPSE administrator. And for the SETS teacher, special education teacher support services, you would reach out to your school, and you can also reach out to what we call an administrator of special education. Those are district-based people, and each district has an administrator for special ed. The first two sessions, you didn't receive the emails with the PowerPoints. If you did not register for the first two, then you wouldn't have received it. And if you did register and didn't receive it, either way, you can totally either send me an email or you can private message me in the chat. Your email address either is fine and I'll send it to you. Does anybody else have any questions? You're welcome. If we and the teacher believe the current level of services being provided to our child isn't enough, how can we find out about additional services and who do we reach out to? So each school should have somebody called a special education liaison, at least for grades K through 8. And then usually the special education liaison in high school is actually the assistant principal. So that would actually be the first thing. Oh, pre-K, there we go, thanks. So for pre-K, that would actually be, so you reach out to your CPSE administrator, but what they're going to ask you for is actually, well, not maybe you, but the school. They would ask for documentation or reasons why more services are needed. So that would be any data that the school can provide within like a, we'll say like a 6 to 8 week span. That's generally what the CPSE is going to look for, and even school age, to make any changes. And of course, again, you could always, you're welcome, reach out to the administrator of special ed for the district, whether it's CPSE or school age. Each district has one, so they can also help too, because I know um, the administrators that I work with are helping out with CPSE cases as well, sometimes if they're, especially if they're in a New York City public school. Also, feel free that if you are not comfortable speaking English, you can ask your interpreter a question, they can ask me, or you could type it in the chat and I can ask them to read it for me in English. So don't let that stop you. Okay, if there's no other questions following this, you'll get, so everybody who registered, whether you came or not, will receive an email. It will have a recording, because I recorded the session of our workshop. It'll have the PowerPoint. And inside the PowerPoint, you'll see actually on the next slide, let me go forward. There are actually a ton of resources for you in terms of getting help with related services. I also included how you can get help for vision services, because we didn't talk about that, sign language interpreting services. So different services I also gave you some resources for. And then you'll also get flyers for the upcoming workshops that we have, which are actually every Wednesday that there's school for the most part. And usually they are at noon, working on getting them another time as well. But for right now, they are at noon. And of course, if you ever have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. You'll have my email address. That's the best way to get in touch with me. Does anybody have any other questions? Don't forget also that feedback form. I'll also attach it in the email as well, because any feedback, I would greatly appreciate it. Yes, you will definitely get the presentation emailed to you, recording and PowerPoint. Thank you so much for the kind words. And if that is all, then I just want to wish everybody a great day. Interpreters, thank you so much as per usual. And I'll stay on in case there are any other questions, but we are complete, and thank you so much.